Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Covey-Spanier, the Director of Public Engagement and Learning at the Weisman Art Museum. We begin by acknowledging that the Weisman Art Museum at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, is located within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It's important to acknowledge the people on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. This land acknowledgement is just the first step in the long, complex process of reconciling with the colonial legacy of our institution. With this acknowledgement and our ongoing work with the repatriation of the Mimbres cultural materials and Truth and Repair project, we affirm our commitment to this process. Tonight, we'll hear from photographer AKINTUNDE AKINLEYE in conversation with urban cadence curator CAROL MAGEE on view at the Weisman Art Museum through December 31st. Urban Cadence tells the multifaceted stories of two urban environments, Lagos, Nigeria, and Johannesburg, South Africa, as evidenced through the artistic expressions of over 60 photographs and videos by 9 award-winning and internationally recognized contemporary African artists. African cities are the fastest growing in the world, and these two cities have experienced this growth in diverse yet fascinating ways. The first as a megacity, and the latter as a center of industrial development. The street scenes in this exhibition represent the complex narratives of these urban sites, tales of migration, labor, desperation, success, hope, and imagination, among others. Copies of the Urban Cadence catalog are available through the WAM shop, which you can contact at wamshop.umn.edu to place your order, or by stopping into the WAM shop during museum hours. And before we begin, I would also like to thank the Art and Martha Kemmer Fund of HRK Foundation and Ameriprise for their generous general operating support for the Weisman Art Museum. I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Weisman for helping to make this event happen this evening. As we begin our conversation, we invite you to submit your questions and thoughts to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will respond to your question in the Q&A period after the presentations. And you can upvote the questions you're interested in by clicking the like button, and questions with more votes will rise to the top of the queue. We're recording tonight's event, and in the coming days, this conversation will be posted to the Weisman's YouTube channel. We have live transcription for tonight's conversation available, but you need to turn it on. Select Show Subtitles in the drop-down menu under the Live Transcription tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And now, I'm pleased to introduce AKINTUNDE AKINLEYE. AKINTUNDE is an award-winning photojournalist whose pictures center on photo-activism and narrative subjects. His photography has traversed the turbulent times in Nigeria's post-colonial history and reflects the nation's undulating fortune. A 2015 New York Times article noted that his work brings kinetic landscapes to life. The first Nigerian photographer to receive the prestigious World Press Photo Prize in 2007, Akile received the National Geographic All Roads Award in 2008, and his work has been published in Time, Vogue, and the New York Times. Akile worked for Reuters news agency for 13 years before leaving journalism to pursue his academic career. He is currently conducting PhD research in anthropology, specializing in African studies with a focus on the complexities of framing, visual material culture, and representations of Yoruba oracular religion at Carleton University, Ottawa, Canada. And CAROL MAGEE. CAROL is a professor of art history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, specializing in African contemporary art with an emphasis on photography. Continuing her interest in the vital role that movement plays in our lives, her current research theorizes the interpretation of lens-based and sound art as it aligns with the theories and practices of the Feldenkrais method. As with all of her projects, she asks questions about how encounters with visual culture shape experiences of lives, about how knowledge is generated, and who is involved in the production of that knowledge. Her writings on these topics can be found in her books, Africa in the American Imagination, African Art, Interviews and Narratives, and articles in journals such as Africa Today, African Arts, Eventual Aesthetics, Photography and Culture, and Social Dynamics. And now join me in welcoming Akintunde to the screen.
Thank you, Katie, for inviting me. Thank you, everybody, Rice Museum, for this evening conference. Basically, let me start by introducing myself. Briefly, of course, Katia has actually, said so much about what I've done in the past and the rest. But let me say, I was born in Lagos. That is what part of the things that I'm always very proud of. To speak that, now maybe over 50 years for me to have lived in Lagos means that I know a bit about Lagos, a bit, because in my knowledge of anthropology, we were taught, and I think I also believe that Lagos, a city like Lagos, is always unfolding, even when you know it, back to back, is always unfolding. It's always in flux. So there are certain things that will always come to me as new. So I was born in Lagos, and I worked there for nearly 20 years before I moved out to seek further formal education abroad. So let me start by saying that Lagos is a place of 12 million people, but many analysts have really argued that it is way, way much more than that the population of Lagos could well be seated about 21 million people. And I want to believe that because when you move around the city of Lagos, you see people in their millions, people in their millions living in informal places you could say, the lowly people live. But I've also argued that at several fora that, when people look at Lagos with the Western lens, it's kind of give it a new meaning in the sense that, okay, so Lagos is a big city, like I was saying, and that much of the structures you'll find, you'll find in Lagos are very, very informal, very informal. But, informality does not actually mean that it is basically about where poor people live. It is an urban culture that has always been there, that I grew up with, So working as a photojournalist in Lagos, and walking the street means that I have to, jump out of buses, walk on the street to do photography, to walk in order to interact with people, with your subject, that you want to photograph. Sometimes some of these pictures that you're going to see were actually taken, without the subject being aware of them, well, it is not a question of trying to, work between realist objectivity and formal subjectivity. But it's just that, I have seen photography as a way of telling stories, as a way of putting that story out there, not just because I grew up in Lagos, but also because I wanted to tell the story of people. And in doing so, I'm also telling the story of myself. So it is a question of self and of people you will see in these photos. Well, part of what I'm showing this night or this evening, really part of what I've done in my doctoral research. Funny enough that I actually wanted to do my doctoral fieldwork in Benin Republic. But then I started my fieldwork at a point when COVID broke out in early 2020. So what happened was that I had to change. I had to write, the ethic board in Carleton, that I was going to change my fieldwork, because even at that point there were troubles, there were political issues, between Benin Republic and Nigeria. So it was kind of difficult for me, dealing with two troubles, COVID-19 and diplomatic issues between Benin Republic and Nigeria. At that point in time, I couldn't cross the border. It was really very difficult. For the fact that many people thought that because Nigeria is a very big country, particularly Lagos, where you have almost 21 million people living, that COVID-19 could rapidly spread to Benin Republic. So it became a very naughty issue that I had to deal with at the beginning of my fieldwork. So I had to change back to Lagos. So somehow Lagos is always like a home. It's always like a place where my heart is always at. So when I returned back to Lagos to think about using the same methodology, using the same theoretical framework, to think through about what I call mobile Pentecostalism. And in a short while, you'll see what I mean by mobile Pentecostalism. So Lagos came back into my fieldwork, not because I actually planned to bring Lagos into my fieldwork or into my doctoral research, but because I think there's something that has to do with Lagos and the love, people who were born in Lagos, people who have lived in Lagos over time, realize that there's always something that connects you with the city, particularly when you're outside of it. So I decided to do away with Lagos, thinking through having other research in Benin Republic. But then, you can think about it. Lagos, became the centerpiece of my research when COVID-19 broke out. So I had to wait at home, in Lagos for nearly 6 months to begin my fieldwork again, So what it means is that I had to change my doctoral research, but of course, still using the same theoretical and methodological approaches to deal with what I came up with mobile Pentecostalism. So it wasn't so strange, living back or coming back to Lagos to think through what I call mobile Pentecostalism. But because I lived in Lagos and I grew up there, I actually worked there for nearly 20 years. So it was easier for me, not because I was born there, but because I had worked there for nearly 20 years. And so it was easier for me to move away from what I call a strange place to a place where I'm so much familiar with. So COVID broke and I was at home, but I wasn't at home just sitting, But while I was sitting at home, I was, thinking about what is it that I'm going to do, Then it came to me that while I was working as a journalist, I basically had this interest in studying religion. And I think in 2013, I had to collaborate with an anthropologist at the University of London on religion in Lagos. So that kind of, invigorated the idea of mobile Pentecostalism. And mobile Pentecostalism, came as an idea that, many theorists, many religious studies scholars, many Yoruba scholars have really studied Pentecostalism in Nigeria, looking at it from institutional approach. But I decided that I'm going to do something very different, and something different had actually been part of what I had thought of when I was working as a journalist, that over time I've seen many people walking the street. A lot of street preachers do walk around the street, what I call, with mobile pulpit. So these pictures you're looking at, where I basically selected some of these things, as part of what I'm going to present in my doctoral, final doctoral presentation, because what happened at that time that I think I found very interesting or fascinating is the fact that a lot of people came up with a lot of improvisation, during COVID, So while I was sitting at home, trying to change my topic from Benin Republic to Lagos, I just had to walk around, after the very first lockdown, because there were about 3 waves of lockdown that actually occurred within the period of my staying at home without, where, so to speak, without doing my research or without starting my research. But then, when the government actually lifted the ban partially on COVID-19 restrictions, so I had to walk around the city, try to see how people were responding to COVID-19, not just within the health institutions, but also among the people, the everyday people on the street. So what I found very interesting is that a lot of people actually came up with improvisation, because you already know that, of course, Lagos is a very dynamic city that is always in flux. So people, we always devise means to survive in a way. So this picture you're looking at was one of those pictures that actually fascinated me, to really look at, how COVID-19 actually restricted, people in practicing their religion, So this is just like a small portion of my research about the ways in which people responded to COVID-19. So people came up with a lot of improvisation, and one of the improvised means of surviving that period was the nose mask. Walking around Lagos, you will see different kinds of nose mask being used, and so I'm very sure Maggie Carol will. This kind of picture that I'm showing you right now will resonate so much with her, because at some point when I met her in 2013, there was this project I was involved in. I wanted to see, how does Lagos look like, when the streets are empty? And it's in very rare occasions when you see Lagos, which I actually refer to in my research as a sleepless city. It is very rare to see Lagos, to see streets on Lagos, roads in Lagos empty. So at that time, I actually took the opportunity to begin a project about empty Lagos. How does Lagos look like when you have 21 million people, in a very small portion of land? That's kind of weird. It's going to be weird when in situation where you don't have anybody on the street. So I moved around during COVID-19 as well. So that came back to me to say, how does the street of Lagos, how do the streets of Lagos look like when state exercises on power over people, to say, okay, you've got to be at home because there is a universal outbreak of COVID-19. So everybody was locked down, and there were a lot of issues that came up at that time. So I had to just work. But of course, you see, I was working, as a journalist before I transited into the academics. But what I'm doing as an anthropologist, was not at that time, was not so much dissimilar from what I was doing as a journalist. Because what I have found out over time is that a journalist will work on a particular story within a very short time. But what anthropologists will do, it's just about the same thing. But the difference is that over time, the anthropologist will live in that space for a very long time, and he's going to come up, make maybe much more with details. But because I've worked as a, photographer, as a photojournalist, it's so easy for me. It's kind of easier for me to really, arm myself with the photographic tool, And what I did basically, which I'm also going to later show you, is that I was able to, combine video, what is it? how does it look like when a photojournalist, typical photojournalist combine moving pictures with still images, to really gather data for anthropological studies. So I came up with this kind of image, a lot of them at that point in time, really to think about what does it look like when a city of 21 million people go to sleep, especially when they are forced to stay back at home. So it has often been said that to survive in Lagos. So I'm going to read this because this is a portion of my research which actually came to me as new. Like I said in the beginning, Lagos is always in flux, it's always unfolding, even though at so many times, I've seen the cenotaph that I'm going to show you shortly. I've seen it several times. But during my research, it came new to me. It came very new to me, and it allowed me in a particular way to theorize about what does it mean to live in a house, and what does it mean to live in a city. A house and a city, became two conceptual issues I had to deal with in my research, particularly when you're dealing with a huge city like Lagos, where people will say, anthropologists will always say that's a kind of, you're moving towards an urban anthropology. So what does it mean, to really theorize the concept of a house and the concept of a city, within a particular space? So I came up with this idea that a house and a city are inseparable. They are not, they are not mutually exclusive. They can't stand on their own, but they are always in flux. They are always moving together. So I came up with this theoretical idea about Akete Iliogbon, because the cenotaph in Isaleko, which I'm going to show you shortly, actually denotes that. But what does it connote? In the real sense of a city and a house. So it has often been said that to survive in Lagos, one needs to be extremely wise. With this popular mantra designed on a cenotaph in Lagos, in Isaleko, Isaleko is a very populated district in Lagos. People who have been to Lagos already know that Isaleko, you find all kinds of people, trying to survive. So on that cenotaph, you have this Yoruba inscription, which reads, Eko Akete Iliogbon. And I'm going to translate that. Literally, it means Lagos is a house full of wisdom, a house full of wisdom. So I was wondering while I was doing my research, what does it mean? This is the cenotaph, it's like an inscription on a wall where, where there's a fence mounted around a statue, a masquerade, basically that is so much associated with Lagos, that's Eyo. So, but on the cenotaph, you have a co-akete, very, well inscribed, metaphorically in such a way that you really have to look very closely to really read this inscription. But the inscription is written in Yoruba. But what it means basically is that Eko in Yoruba is Lagos. Akete, it's a place, where it's a kind of, dress that is very, a kind of cap that is very associated with Lagos. But that Ile is house. Ile is house. Ile Ogbon. So I was wondering why the inscription says, Lagos is a house full of wisdom, a house. How the Yoruba, who are historically the people who actually, historically establish or came to Lagos. How did they come about this idea of a city that is being, translated into a house? So then I was just wondering that to think about, a city like Lagos where everything is happening on the street, everything. I mean, and that's why I've always argued that, to look at Lagos with a Western lens, it's like almost going to come to you as a failed city. But Lagos is it's not a failed city. It is just, the life on the streets in Lagos is just as unique as to its urban culture. Everybody's always on the streets selling, buying, and transacting businesses. But when you look at this picture, when you look at this picture and you juxtapose it with this, which literally means that Eko Akete, it's Lagos is a house full of wisdom. Then you can ask that question: why is it that the Yoruba came up to think about Lagos as a house rather than a city? So I could possibly think about Eko Akete, Ilu is city, rather than Ile. Ile is a house. But on this inscription, there is Ile. So if a code, which is Lagos, is an Ile, which is a house, what does it mean? So when you look at this picture that I'm showing you, you'll see that apart from the vehicular and the human traffic you have on the street, you also have buildings, that kind of frame the people, mingling, moving on the street. So, and on those buildings, you'll see the windows. You'll see the windows, that those windows kind of indicate to you that those are houses, right? Like, so in other words, a house is a unit of a city, so without the houses, the city cannot exist. And in other words, the city cannot exist in a vacuum. If city cannot exist in a vacuum, then it becomes a house. It becomes an ile. So in other words, a house is where culture, behaviors, um, our youth are formed and transformed. So when you think about this kind of concept, ile, which is a house, and ilu, which is a city, it kind of merge into what it means, to define Lagos. So Lagos is a place where you have limitless knowledge production. People, when you encounter people on the street, you are sure that this is a Jumota, is a very populated place in Lagos, where everything you can find, everything, including, well, maybe the only thing you cannot find there is selling human being, but for every other thing you can find, you can buy, you can transact your businesses, and you can do a lot of things. But don't forget, like those buildings that actually frame the people on the street, it's a house. They are units, they are houses that form the city itself. So you look at the people on the street actually came out from these houses. So in a way, this became one area I actually theorized in my doctoral research, to look closely about what this cenotaph actually mean. I've passed through this cenotaph several times, but theorizing about what it means basically came to me as new about a house. So Lagos became a city house by the conception of people who actually put up this cenotaph. So when you look at it, Lagos I was able to translate that or interpret that because Lagos kind of formed the kind of person I am. So to mean that when you live elsewhere in the world, people always say that when you live in Lagos and you are unwise, you are unwise. If you live all of your life in Lagos and you remain unwise, then there's no other place in the world where you will live and you'll be wise. So in other words, Lagos will teach you a lot of things. And I've seen it, in my doctoral research. I came up with this argument that Lagos is a place and is a city where you have limitless knowledge production. I mean, when you are knowledgeable, then you become wise. That is what it means by the conception of this photograph. So I'm very sorry. I'm trying to theorize about some of the pictures that are even I've taken or shot in the past, to think that most of the pictures I've shot actually had a lot of connotative meaning, and they can possibly come to me anew. And that's why. So in Lagos, you'll come across, in the Dumota, where I've shown you the picture, you'll come across this kind of signs. Actually, this picture were not taken in Saleko, but I've taken a lot of other pictures in Saleko where that's in the Dumota, where you have this kind of signs. So what it means is that Lagos is a place where everybody struggle to survive, the rich and the poor. And so this kind of sign, when you look at this kind of sign, you will realize that somebody is trying to make an ends meet, and is not doing that, in such a way that some other people have seen Lagos as a place where you have scammers, or you have drug dealers, where you have, robbers on the street. But I've said this over time and in other fora, that when you think about Lagos, 21 million people, I always do this calculation. When you have 21 million people in a place, how many people can you think in your imagination that are, that are bad people, bad in the sense of being a robber, being scammers, or armed robbers? How many people? Maybe somebody is going to ask me someday, maybe the whole of 21 million people. But I stand to differ, because Lagos kind of produce people like us who are actually doing what we know how to do best. And that's why you have this argument that Lagos is a city house where knowledge production is limitless. So you will come across this kind of pictures. I mean, these collages are put together. When you will see a photographer. I'm so much interested in this picture of photographer, sitting, facing me facing my lens directly. And on that wall where he sat, you'll see that inscription which says, or which reads, "Wait and get passport, just 2-minute trials." So this man, like, I spoke with him after, after taking this picture, and I spoke with him, and he has been doing this for 25 years. So I imagine that if he has been doing this for 25 years, he must have met a lot of people who came to shoot pictures for, visa, traveling visa, passport, and the rest. In Lagos, you will see Danfo. Danfo is a kind of commercial transport that is very unique to Lagos. You can't find it elsewhere. It's very unique to Lagos. And I took a lot of Danfo, even during my doctoral research, field work, that because it allows you to move quickly, and it allows you to hear street stories that you almost cannot see when you sit down in the comfort of your luxurious homes, maybe in Ikoyi and other places that have been so segregated for the rich. So I took a lot of, a lot of my journeys through Danfo. Danfo is where you have the conductor standing by at the edge of the door, hailing for passengers, which I found very unique to Lagos, because elsewhere, perhaps when you think about Western countries, you can't find such thing. But Lagos has this very unique Danfo, which I'm also going to show you in a short while. So you see all kinds of manner of people, trying to survive. And with these pictures, you can kind of go back to connect to what I've said in the past, theorizing about the city and the house, that Lagos is a city house where you have limitless knowledge production. Because you're going to encounter these different strata of people on the street of Lagos, just like you have, people trying to, find their way through, or meander their way through the traffic in Isalico. You're definitely going to come across any of these guys for the first time. I mean, this is basically for the first time visitors in Lagos. But for people who have been in Lagos, you already know that you're going to see people selling water in sachet. You will see people selling assorted fruit in wheelbarrows. That's kind of, it's weird to some other people, but this is part of the urban culture that Lagos has produced. And in that sense, Lagos, we always unfold to you every day. So in Lagos as well, just as like what you will find in Isaleko and elsewhere in Lagos, you will see a man, just like what you have in this picture. You see a man trying to converse people to buy herbal medicine, with a loudspeaker, a microphone, talking to people, and people kind of gather to listen to him. This is like kind of picture I took from a pedestrian bridge, overlooking the people, the performance of this man on the street. So moving quickly, you will also encounter, street side boutiques. The boutiques are, kind of come in different shapes. You see some will hang these on, like this man you're looking at, we kind of hold up the handkerchief on a stick that kind of form different kind of colors. And like I said, the street side boutique come in different shapes. So I'm particularly interested in all these kind of things, in my doctoral research, to think through about the character of Lagos. Like I've said, if I'm researching a place anew, regardless of the fact that I had worked there, almost 20 years, if I'm researching the place with a new lens, what are the things, that I've seen before, but that are coming to me in a different mode, So I encounter much of these, of course, like the boutique, you have to mend some of those things, some of those cloths that you buy from the street side boutique. So you will see this kind of roadside tailor or fashion designer, where, if you like. These are some of the pictures that I came with. So I came up with this idea that if I'm studying religion in Lagos, if I'm studying urban religion in Lagos, how am I going to, define the kind of religion I'm going to study in Lagos? And that was why I came up with the character of Lagos, talking about Lagos in a new way for a new audience that maybe there are very much more academic. And especially for people who have never been to Lagos, because what many people have heard about Lagos, perhaps, through the Western media. But, putting that character in my doctoral research means a lot to me, because I actually wanted to show you the character of Lagos. But of course, a lot of people have said that Lagos can never be like London. Yes, maybe not. It can never be like London because it has its own urban unique character that Lagos will always want to put up for you, and to let you know that it's a place that is, always unfolding, and it is always in flux. So I think of that, to think through that Lagos is not just producing that knowledge or producing the people you encounter on the street, but that Lagos itself is a contested religious field. And I came up with that argument to think that a friend of mine, whom I actually collaborated with, once said that we can look at religion in Lagos. We can study religion in Lagos, not through the lens of differences, but through the lens of what she calls assemblage. Assemblage is a kind of, religious theory where, people of different religious beliefs, we come under the same roof to worship. Well, what kind of God? Maybe Jesus Christ, maybe Muhammad, maybe Yoruba oracular religion, but under the same roof. So it's a kind of assemblage, that comes together under one roof. But of course, my argument is that, yes, you're going to find such religious movement in Lagos. But that does not mean that Lagos has moved away from being referred to as a contested religious field, and I'm going to show you briefly part of the arguments I've made in my doctoral research to think that yes. And what I mean, basically, I'm not saying that Lagos is a place where you always find religious violence. No. But my argument is based on the fact that how do religious movements in Lagos use media, as a way of defining their visibilities and power? Because religion and media are two key areas that I think anthropologists and social scientists have looked at as places where power can be contested, and visibilities also can be contested. So you'll find, if you look more closely in Lagos, you'll find this kind of a thing. And so I came up with the idea that Lagos is a contested religious field, that why new bridges and road networks are constantly being built in Lagos, mostly executed with foreign loans taken by the state from China. But of course, I spoke a little bit about what it means, to live in Nigeria generally, not just in Lagos, that much of what we do, much of our economic resources are being, dissipated on importation rather than, building industry in Lagos. But of course, that's another story for another day. That the city space itself is delineated into categories. But of course, much of what I've done in Lagos, almost 70% of my work as a photojournalist, actually, were produced in Lagos, even though I was working for Reuters. So, but I also had to move or travel most time from Lagos to other parts of West Africa. But Lagos was my base. So I saw a lot of things from Lagos, and you see that the city is built a lot on informality. But then there are sections of the city where the rich you actually congregate to live together. And so, and I've said in urban slums, on gated communities, and a medium-sized estate across the city do thrive well. I mean, informality is a concept that I actually brought in. When you think through about those pictures of Isaleko, about the city house and the city Ile and the house itself as a place of unlimited religious knowledge production. So you think that, oh, everything about Lagos is about informality. Yes, almost 70% of the living areas in Lagos, or the residential areas, or the places of businesses, are really very, very informal. But it is very unique to Lagos. I don't know, maybe other cities in Africa do have this kind of a thing. I haven't been to South Africa, but I know that Lagos informality is really very unique to its urban culture. So, however, like I said, I've argued that, however, a key impetus for this creative interiorization of Lagos, of people selling on the street, of people mingling, people the street is always in flux, has come to us as religious performances. So I witness a lot of, even as a journalist, I witness a lot of religious performances, but it is more like I was much more interested in knowing how religious performances are done on the street rather than in the church and in the mosque. So, but then I say that rather than studying religion, from the point of assemblage, I actually see religion in Lagos from the point of differences. And so these differences were basically because of plural form of religion in Lagos. And that is very, very typical of Lagos. So we cannot run away from the fact that Lagos produces different kind of knowledge, but also in that space, it produces different kind of religious beliefs. And this is why during the NSAS, I was actually beginning to resume my field work, because I had to stay for like almost 6 months, just walking around the street without writing anything, without doing anything, because ethically, we were told to actually suspend any research that has to do with human interaction because of COVID-19. So, but during the NSAS, NSAS is a kind of protest, like it became a very global, a global phenomenon like for almost a week. That was in October 2020 when I just resumed back my fieldwork. And underneath that protest, of course, a lot of young Nigerians came together to protest against police brutality, which became NSAS. SARS is a kind of police contingent that is very special, in a way to deal with armed robbery. But the police, which is SARS, kind of, are to over what I call exploiting the citizens. And many people just thought someday this is going to come to our head. And it did in October 2020 when, a few youths came together and it became a very big, very, very big protest, particularly in Lagos, because like I said, population is always having its own way of making Lagos the base of everything, including protest. So, but as I was walking around, I saw a lot of pictures. I took a lot of pictures, and this picture you're looking at actually came out for me as one single picture that actually told the whole story of NSAS in Nigeria at that time. So to even think that during a protest, there is always a religious angle to the ways in which people, exercise their right, their agency in telling the government about what they like and what they don't like. So during one of those times, I was walking around the street, because there was no vehicular movement per se, and I saw this Islamic prayer, which kind of defined everything for me. Just, when you look through the image, there is a man, just in front of those guys, who was actually holding Nigerian flag. So you look at nationalism in this picture, you think about nationalism, then you think about religion. So it's kind of come together, for me to think through of the religious differences in Lagos, even though at that point in time, a lot of people came, irrespective of their religious differences and their ethnic, affiliations, came together to tell the government that enough is enough, that police brutality in Nigeria has to stop. So, it came to that point where I began to look at Lagos from the semiotic media perspective, that beyond the traditional media, beyond, I worked as a journalist, but beyond the traditional media, how do people, the urban people, the people, everyday people in urban Lagos, do practice their religion? And when they practice their religion, in what ways do they, try to let people know through the rudimentary media use? And like I will show you shortly, the uniqueness of Danfo. Danfo is a kind of public commercial transport, which you see on the left of this image. They are always painted with yellow and black strips, like you see. This is very unique of Lagos. But as I was walking around, because I had this in my head, that how do people actually, exhibit their religious differences within the urban space? And I came up with several pictures that I can put together, that can actually support that argument that Lagos is a religious, contested religious faith. And so when you look at the picture on the left, you will see this inscription: without Islam, there's no salvation. So that, to me, it's a closure to other religious options. So in that sense, what about people who within the city also practice other religion, particularly Yoruba oracular religion, which is, a part of my research, but I'm not going to deal with that in this presentation. Basically, I was just looking at, how people, exhibit their religious differences within Lagos. But in doing that, how do they use those, these semiotics, these rudimentary semiotical media science to really talk about their religious beliefs and their differences and their superiority, which is a kind of way of exercising power. So when you look at the image on the right, you have another religious option, but with a closure to other religious options as well. No Jesus, no heaven. So in other words, the two images kind of, without even speaking about any other thing, it shows to me that within the flux, within the movement of things, of people, of vehicular, urban arrangement, there's this really religious differences that people carrying on their head. And they exhibit this, without knowing it, without a recourse to other people's religious options. They exhibit this through media visibility, and not just in traditional media that a journalist like me will always want to think about, but those mundane media, those mundane signs that you see across the city. So these images kind of, came out for me to support that argument that Lagos is a kind of religious feed, not because it becomes violent. No, I mean, during my research, I didn't see I can count only a few times during my work as a journalist where people, went on the streets on rampage because of religion, But then, when you look closely, there's that difference. Those differences are always there, and it's really very rift, and it's very common. Except you look closely, you can almost walk past those signs. So it is not just Islam. It is not just about religion, Christianity. Also, because Lagos is always, a space where people talk about power, religious, ethnic, because in Lagos you find almost all ethnic affiliations, in Lagos. People, came from everywhere, including West African states, to live in Lagos. So these pictures you're seeing on the left, it's a kind of small miniature shrine, Yoruba shrine, that actually tells you, through the inscription on the door that, this is a Yoruba, a kind of Yoruba, a signature of Yoruba oracular religion within the city space. So this is like a shrine. And what I found out, during my research is the fact that procession, oracular Yoruba oracular procession always, most times, most often begin from this small shrine. You will see people after the prayers and orders move through this, through the street from this shrine. And around it, you still see that a lot of people they don't care. People, because they just believe that, But of course, the shrines are not just there because they just want to be there. It tells a lot of story. I mean, this shrine, for example, tells a lot of story about the history of that space, because Lagos is always contested for. Like, some people will say Lagos is a no man's land, but there's this idea that Lagos is a place owned by certain people, and it became a very big argument during my research, particularly when it became the period for politics. That there are a lot of people from the East who had settled in Lagos, who had lived in Lagos for more than 40 years. And so they are entitled to the space as well. So on the left, the picture on the left, you'll see the the public address system hung on a public electricity pole. But under it, beneath that public address system, which is always used by all religious organizations, all religious movements, beneath that, below that public address system, is what I saw as Indian Lord spiritual temple. But of course, it tells me that, of course, I didn't I didn't actually deal with Buddhism and other religion. I only dealt with, Pentecostalism, which I'm going to show you shortly. It means this symbol tells me something, that Buddhism, perhaps a religion from the East, is also ubiquitous in Lagos, is very popular in Lagos in a way. So that brought me to the idea of mobile Pentecostalism, that this is the central point I'm trying to do in my research, that beyond those other religions, because Lagos is a plural religious field, beyond those plural religious beliefs that I've shown you, that are always, in a contestation for visibility. There's this particular way in which Pentecostalism, beyond the institutional exposure or global explosion, there's this little unknown people that actually are the basis of Pentecostalism in Nigeria, and a lot of them you'll see in Lagos. And so in my research, I focus on what I've termed mobile Pentecostalism as one mode of Pentecostal Christianity in Nigeria, especially in Lagos, where it is now proliferated. So in mobile Pentecostalism, I situate the evangelical work of Pentecostal street preachers, not only within the framework of media culture that makes the body a vehicle through which Pentecostal Christian messages get circulated in Lagos, but also I demonstrate how certain printed communicative materials invigorate a mode of religious culture through which Pentecostals penetrate and mediate Lagos urban space for Christian ideology. Like much of what I spoke about in Christian ideology is about Pentecostalism itself, is always aiming at converting people on the street, particularly in Lagos. So like the side traders, the hawkers, the photographers you see in Isaleko and elsewhere, all operating within circulatory informal economy, I do much and elsewhere in Lagos. The Pentecostal street preachers in Lagos are part of the working class, of the struggling masses, because I use Walter Benjamin's, arcade, where he talks about the streets of Paris in 1930s. So that kind of, became a theoretical basis on which I look at mobile Pentecostal preachers in Lagos, alongside with other people, who kind of turn the urban space into a canvas, into a big canvas where they can write their religious beliefs and, exhibit this visibility in those pictures I've just shown you. So that mobile Pentecostalism, of course, I came up with mobility because these guys will always move about Lagos on legs, in mobile pulpits, in vehicles, to preach to people. So I came up with the idea of mobile Pentecostalism because they are always on the move. They are always on the move, and they go about holding the Bible, different kinds of signs, and that could basically convince people that the urban space of Lagos is actually overtaken by Pentecostal Christianity. And so, like these pictures I'm showing you, you'll see that man holding, a very small public address system, a Bible, and funny enough, something that tells you that the time to really go back home, we always come back. I mean, here I was able to interpret this as always to mean that you should always prepare to go to heaven, and in going to heaven you have to convert to Christianity. Not just Christianity, you have to become born again Christian. And so the inscription of time within the urban space has a lot of connotative meaning about religious beliefs and the ways in which other religious options are closed. So these two pictures is just, so I'm just going to run through some of the pictures just to see the ways in which the urban semiotics work with, mobile Pentecostalism right from this point where people go about mobile pupils, mobile signboard, I mean, different kind of signs to talk, I mean, to preach to people. But of course, this for me, I think after my doctoral program, I'm going to return back to Lagos to expand, um, this project on mobile Pentecostalism, because even when I was working as a photojournalist, I really see people, or particularly in scholarly work, where street preachers, like the way it is now proliferated in Lagos, have been studied. I haven't seen, maybe uh, Professor CAROL MAGEE can, I mean, who had worked in Lagos and elsewhere in Africa, can actually, confirm if this is something that have been studied in the past. But I think we have very limited study on this, because I have searched and I can't find any. So it's something I actually think I want to, expand as my research, as I move away from, in a few months, as I move away from being a doctoral candidate into the job market. So these are some of the pictures. So what happened was that I found out that when these guys move about the city, when they, they evangelize on the street with mobile pulpits, just like you see mobile pulpits, you can see like these pictures, they are, basically constructed for mobility. And that was why where I came about mobile Pentecostalism, which I think move away from the institutional Pentecostalism that have been studied in Nigeria over time. So you can see from the pulpit, it's like the way they are constructed were basically, to move within the city. And when you look at the picture on the right, for example, you will see loudspeakers and, car batteries, to power the microphone. So it's something that is so fascinating to me to think that this is an area of Pentecostalism that I really want to, to pioneer, I mean, so to speak, or to expand, in the near future. So mobile Pentecostalism, in with the mobile people, you will see them hanging banners, different kind of inscriptions. These are basic urban semiotics I've been able to analyze in my research. And it's kind of very funny to me because, when I was even working as a journalist, I almost kind of ignored this kind of, but they came to me in a very new way. And
Can I jump in here, Akintunde, and ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure that we have enough time for other people to ask questions as well. I'm really intrigued by the signage that these mobile Pentecostalists are using and the way you captured them in your photographs. And I'm wondering, because you have a lot of signs in your other photographs as well, if you see these Pentecostalists drawing on that aesthetic that's all around Lagos with the signs, or if you see their use of signs being a little bit different, or if you yourself are drawn to the signs in your own aesthetic, because it seems to show up so much in the photographs. If you haven't something to say about that.
Because photography itself is about it's about understanding signs, So in my doctoral research, what I've done basically is to employ what I call performance theory and semiotics, because so I'm drawn to signs within the city because the city itself, speak to you in so many ways, particularly in non-verbal way. But you need to be very, very meticulous about it, to really see them, because sometimes, I tell people particularly when I teach, undergraduate student in communication and all the rest of that, somehow the best way to really do photography is to train your eyes to see signs, because photography itself is about sign development. It's about understanding the ways in which signs, come to us in a very subtle manner. And so because they are just there, and the people who are putting them up, you may not even understand the extent at which these signs will go in, in speaking to people, in speaking with people, in a certain way. But of course, one can say, yeah, they do understand that those signs are going to, say things about, what they do. But then you really have to be very meticulous about it to really see them, because every day you just pass them.
Yeah. I was also wondering, I have another question sort of about photography and how you're using it here. In particular, you talked so much, and I found it really fascinating, the way you presented Lagos and your experience of Lagos during the pandemic and how that's impacted the research you're doing, and sort of on the journey that you've led us on through that development of this project, and how you yourself had to sort of rethink your project and make sort of the familiar strange, or the strange familiar again, and coming to know Lagos in a different way. And I'm wondering how you saw photographs being part of that process for you, because being an academic and writing sort of a dissertation is a very different thing than being a photojournalist. And so, but you're showing us these photographs, which are in many ways a continuation of the work that you were doing before. And so I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that.
One of the things that actually fascinated me, when I came to Canada, I came initially to study film. And so it was interesting that, because I also studied mass communication back home in Lagos. It was when I was studying film that I realized that I could possibly transit into anthropology through ethnographic film. So studying ethnographic film during my MA program in Carleton actually drew me to anthropology, because one area of anthropology that actually fascinated me is visual anthropology, which I think in Carleton and in some other universities here in Canada it's not the most popular thing to do. Basically, much of the professors I've interacted with are much more interested in the words, in the written words, like, okay, just write. But I think, in so many ways, because not just because I practice as a photographer, but I think photography has a way of explaining things rather than just, no, that's what I was, that's not what I was going to say. Photography has a way of revealing things. Let me put that way, revealing rather than explaining. Of course, it's going to explain, but it reveals more. It has a way of, like, I just imagine if I've said all these, just with slide and written words. Perhaps some people out there may not be able to really grapple with what I've been talking about. So in context, photography puts your theoretical concepts into that perspective where understanding and knowledge can be expanded. So this is what I found very fascinated with visual anthropology. So in doing my fieldwork, of course, the first thing that came to my mind, rather than just writing my feed notes, is that much of my feed notes are going to be, supported by photographs, and I was able to do that effectively, to the extent that only recently, Carleton is building up a visual lab, just because I've presented some of the things that is not many people think that you can use photographs. Perhaps this is a challenge because anthropologists in the past always think that you need to know much about the ways in which to produce pictures. So it became a problematic issue, that am I going to produce pictures, because you need to know the technical know-how of how to produce pictures. But I think digital technology has made that easier. People can use phone, you can use different kind of things to really gather, data for your research. And this is what I've been able to do effectively.
Yeah, I think that you really have, and I think one of the questions that one of our attendees has asked sort of draws on that. Like, you've spoken a lot about the informal economy and informal life in Lagos, and your pictures depict some of that. And the questions that someone was interested in knowing was about, are the houses in Lagos also marketplaces? Because it seemed visually that there were goods in some of the windows, right? So that just sort of like what you can see visually for the houses. And then, does Lagos regulate commercial activities in terms of space? So I think that's a really interesting question, knowing how Lagos works. And I thought,
yes, of course,
everybody would
there's
want to
always
know.
the regulation. There's always the state regulation. Even as I'm seated here in Ottawa, you see, I've listened to news recently. I mean, the last 2 weeks, the Lagos state governor has always been going around, demolishing buildings that are built on canals, I mean, removing people from the street, on the walkways and all the rest. There's always a regulation. I mean, but let me tell you, Lagos has a way. It's a very small space. I cannot really give you an accurate size of Lagos right now, but I think compared to other states in Nigeria, it's a very small space where everybody, kind of, jostle for space, and so the little space that are available are always contested for, and so Lagos government is always regulating. It's always, there's always a law in place not to build on canals, not to, not to sell on the street, not to do all this kind of thing. But trust me, Lagos has a way of, reclaiming its informality. For me, it's an urban culture. I'm not advocating the fact that people should, go against the law. But informality itself is not a crime. It's something that should be managed by the government. I mean, if the kind of picture you're looking at, of course you have the yellow buses, always, this is an express, actually. This is an express, it's supposed to be an express. But it has been turned into market, into, places where people, move in flocks and others. So there's always that regulation. But Lagos has a way, has a unique way of reclaiming that informality, and it's working, it's working, because otherwise, if regulations are to be put in place like what you have in a Western country, trust me, a lot of people will die of hunger if they cannot sell on the street and if they cannot live their life, and I can tell you, a lot of people on the street actually depend on what they sell on the streets under the the makeshift stores. I mean, people do all kinds of business, small scale businesses there that you can't find anywhere in Western country. But this is the way Lagos has produced its unique knowledge, its unique space, and its unique urban culture.
Yeah, I think you have that photograph in the exhibition that really speaks to that, where the gentleman carrying the goods is walking in between the two overpass, and it's really shows precariousness literally shows the precariousness of that informal economy.
Yeah,
for someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We also have another question about the signs and the languages in Lagos, and that a lot of the signs were in English, but a lot of the other signs weren't. And if you could speak a little bit about some of those other languages. Obviously some was Yoruba, but other languages there.
Yeah, I think apart from these, every other ones are written in English. Yeah, so apart from these, which I was able to dissect, to think about Eko. Eko is Lagos, in Yoruba. This inscription is written in Yoruba. So Akete is a kind of fashion, is a kind of, fashion in Lagos. But Ile is a house. Ile, I mean, what you have within that inscription is a house. Then Ogbon is wisdom. Ogbon is wisdom in Yoruba. Ogbon, and I was able to tell you that the ways in which people will conceptualize this is that Lagos is a city house. It's a house from where you can gather a lot of knowledge. You can, you are formed for the world to explore. So Lagos is a city house. I mean, this is what this inscription is basically. And I think talking about, and I think apart from these, other ones are just, in English. Because of course you understand that, Lagos, Nigeria, generally used to be a British colony. So everybody kind of speak English. If you cannot speak English, you almost, can speak, everybody can almost speak Pidgin English. So which is, let me use the word adulterated English in a way. But in a way, it's a kind of uniqueness on its own. And that's what you'll find everywhere. English without, so.
Yeah, you can also find almost any indigenous language spoken there, though, right? Like you can find Igbo or Hausa or any of the other languages, because so many people migrate to the city that you can find almost any other language also spoken in Lagos. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's true, because but I can tell you, everybody speaks Pidgin English,
Yes.
almost everybody,
Yeah.
So even if you come from the north, you may not be, you may not be, be seen as having this kind of formal education, but then you are able to, speak some Pidgin English. So everybody, in a way, will understand each other in certain ways.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell me, like, now that there's a lot of Chinese influence there, do you see, are you starting to see lots of signs with Chinese and that sort of stuff did I miss it?
I'm not sure I added that, but I think I was supposed to include one Chinese frame here, because, like I said, I actually refer to, in a Saleko, you see everything that is being sold or being transacted, actually, imported from China or some part of Europe. But I'm not sure I included any, yeah, of course, there are a lot of Chinese signs, particularly when roads and infrastructure, bridges and all stuff like that are built. So you see the Chinese signs, written everywhere. And I think in University of Lagos, there is a program on, on studying Chinese Mandarin language. So well, I think beyond this presentation, I think it's a very big discourse again, thinking about the influence of Chinese in Africa. And one of the places where you can find that influence is, is in Lagos. You will see a lot of Chinese signs everywhere, moving from, Idumota. And you also see Chinese walking about. They almost, a lot of them are always part of that urban culture, because nobody cares about where you came from in Lagos.
It's where you're going, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're just going to face where you are going.
Yeah. Did you want to show this video? I know that you had wanted to sort of show this to everybody, and we didn't quite get to it, but I think it would be really nice for people to sort of get a sense of that movement and what it's like to be on the streets with people.
Yeah. So of course, I've shown the picture of this man. Is it moving? Can you see? Can you hear?
Come down by your after just on up there when you want to see how you people. Electric charger, smartwatches, Bluetooth, memory, inverter model. Come down by your after just on up there when you want to see how you people. Your smartwatches, laptop.
So you'll see, this is just like 30 minutes, 30 seconds clip. I did a lot of videos as well. I did a lot of videos that kind of gave me a new sense of how the city itself is always in the move. I did a lot of videos, which, kind of different from what I was doing as a photojournalist. It's giving me a new sense of how the space is, being constituted, with movement.
Yeah, I think it's really quite important to be able to see that. So we have one last question, and that is, who finances the mobile Pentecostal missionaries? Do you have a sense of that? Who provides money for them?
Oh, okay. So money for, that's one area I actually, individually, I think I spoke with a lot of them. And particularly, like, you look at this man on the right with the signboard, because I mean, they are different. I think I dedicated a little bit of space for talking about this set of Pentecostals with the mega pastors, who are super rich. They are not rich. So what they told me, and at some point, I think I refer to them as radical pastors, because they are, because they can walk the street, they don't care about the material gains they're going to take away from preaching on the street. A lot of them told me they are not even interested in building a church. So because what it means is that to build a church, you need a lot of money, you need a lot of people to contribute to building a church, which actually, when you get to Lagos, it proliferates everywhere. But these guys, they told me that, because a lot of them don't have money. So what usually happens is that people who believe in what they do, we always give them money. Just because of time, I had no time, but I knew, my presentation may be longer. I could have, added one video of another Pentecostal street preacher where people were donating money, people were giving money in a pouch. And you see, so they depend so much on these donations from the street to print the tract, to construct the signboard, and to construct the mobile pulpit. So you can see that in a way, they are much more interested in converting people rather than in the material gains, because I really had to ask them the same question: where do they get money, to finance their mobile evangelism?
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. This has been very fascinating. It's lovely to connect with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. And thank you to the Weisman for hosting us this evening. It's really been a treat.
Thank you so much, Carol and Akintunde, for this conversation. And I think, like, the exhibition, what this conversation has done for me is I just have now so many more questions. Your work opens up so many different vantage points, and I hope that we all can continue this conversation. And I welcome those of you who can join us to come and see the show on view at the Weisman through the end of December. Again, thank you all for joining us, for spending time with us tonight. And after the event, you will be sent a survey, and we would love to get your feedback. It helps us design programs and initiatives that meet the needs and interests of our community. So with that being said, until next time, thank you all. Take care. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.